Alright, draft physics video. Don't know what category to put this in, kind of an overview video I suppose, but just a lament on physics and the whole subject of how it's so difficult to challenge any of these established premises and axioms of physics, and to have a fair fight in getting this done, in terms of just pointing out how there's a better way to add up the facts, the evidence, and come up with a much better answer than the answers physics provides, which I have keep harping on, bent space, virtual photons, dark matter, spooky action, just Copenhagen, many worlds, multiverses, string theory, extra dimensional, cooked math. You couldn't get more cooked, in terms of some idea that, oh yes, we unified physics by creating 11 universes to put all the errors in. To make all the action happen, that because this universe can't possibly do what we need it to do mathematically, so we need 11 other dimensions to make this stuff happen, because it can't happen here with the math we're using. Just stuff that's insanely premised. It just doesn't have any hope of being the right answer, and yet it's thought of as, oh yeah, that's possible, that could be, that could be the right answer. And anyway, so I've pointed out repeatedly, and I'll continue to point it out, that the two biggest parts of physics, gravity and magnetism. You have to kind of think of those as the two biggies, and both of those, physics provides just no explanation. Clearly they don't provide one of the nuclear forces either. There's no explanation for why stuff moves. Zero. Just some sort of, it just magically wants to, because the space is bent. It's just or it's quantum mechanically got a spring, it's got a string inside of it's vibrating, and the vibration is somehow making it move, or there's just nothing, absolutely nothing. And people aren't like hungry saying, please give me a rational explanation, give me something that makes a little bit of fucking sense. No, they're just belligerently hostile to this very notion that what you'd find something wrong with these completely unexplained theories of movement and motion. What's wrong with unexplaining things? Isn't that what physics is supposed to do, is provide no explanation and just leave it open to some kind of silly speculation? Inventing universes and stuff. Isn't that what physics is for? It's just so frustrating. I listened to another thing with that Krauss guy, and he was talking to the stupid loony green guy, about string theory, and these, they're just talking like, well, Einstein was so inventive and so brilliant. How could he come up with that idea? It's so amazing. He took a thing called dropping a pebble into water, and it will dissipate the energy by the inverse square. Well, by the R squared law. The R law. But light bulbs would be a good example, or anything else. Radiation. The sun, for frick's sake. So the sun's doing two things. It's doing the gravity thing and it's doing the light thing. And both of them are the inverse square law. And so he thinks it's brilliant that Einstein came up with this idea of, converting, like I said, you could sort of illustrate it as just a dot with these eccentric circles that get smaller. Well, I'm not going to draw it very well because I'm trying to make it small. But, just they're smaller and smaller circles. The lines get tighter and tighter. And so it just has the illusion, if you looked at it from the top, it's like a topography map. It gives you this illusion of stuff going up or down, either way you want to look at it. It gives it an extra dimension. And so he turned that, a topography map, into an idea of a whole. And he could have done the opposite, But obviously the force he was looking for was an attracting force, so the whole makes sense. But like I said, should I draw a light bulb, doing some kind of Einsteinian thing, and I could illustrate the force coming off a light bulb, with a chart like this, and so Einstein did the opposite with gravity. So he just did the, oh yeah, it's a bend. So that's all we're talking about here. And this is somehow something you talk about as being a brilliant thing to do, is to take a curved line and look at it and say, okay, I can see that could be a bowl full of soup. I can see that as a well. And like I said, when it's a force getting radiated by like a light bulb, you could say, oh yeah, I can see it's really strong at its peak. Now the funny thing is, right? If Einstein would have done the analogy to a light bulb and thought of it as straight line radiation, this is the inverse square law, from a sphere. You have to just think of it going in all three dimensions. Little stuff's coming out this way and this way and this way and this way. Just a spiked ball. And that's the inverse square law. Stuff just evenly flies out of the thing. But clearly he was looking for a force that somehow makes things attract, and so this stuff doesn't work for him, because it doesn't explain attraction. But it's the same thing. It's radiation or the lack of radiation. It's pressure or the lack of pressure. And with light bulbs, you have this clear limitation. The light bulb gets brightest right next to the light bulb. But this inverse square law thing only really applies based on size. So if you had something that was radiating, at the inverse square law, light, and you were a small thing, your test instrument was small enough, well, if you get that test instrument close enough, it all of a sudden this force law changes from the inverse square, from 1 over r squared to just 1 over r, because one dimension you won't be missing anything, because you can't, because you're such a small target, and the radiation is coming from such a big source that you're going to get all this radiation from the sides still, from all these other players in the creation of the force. So the density of force that's going to hit you is going to increase, because you can't really escape it based on this linear difference in size. So once something gets to a certain proportional size difference than you are, the inverse square breaks down in the real world of forces. Now that doesn't happen in Einstein's gravity well, because it's completely synthetic. It doesn't have to obey any of the real world laws. So his gravity well, unlike a light bulb that has a peak intensity, and that's it, that's the peak, that's as much as you can get this thing. You can bring your test instrument as close as possible and you'll get the maximum amount of photons hitting you. You can get as close as you can get to the filament of the light bulb. You get the maximum amount of photons, and that's it. You can't get any higher. But Einstein's gravity well, oh no, that goes forever, infinite. And so this is where logical rules kind of get suspended, and you say, well, so in every other case where the inverse square law applies, which are always cases where you need a medium to create one like Einstein. Like you have to have a bucket of water and have a plug at the base, and you pull the plug out and you get an inverse square law spiral to the hole, or something close to it anyway. For all the other cases we see in the real world where the inverse square law applies, it's because of radiation, and it's straight line radiation. It doesn't bend around corners and do any of that kind of crap. It's straight line, and that gives you the inverse square law. So that would have been, so you have the example of the sun that's been sitting there forever doing this exactly the same thing gravity's doing, except all the energy's going in the out way, where for gravity we have this perception of it's not a force that's pushing things away like photons. It's somehow a force that creates the opposite effect, which is the thing is moving towards it. There's some sort of consuming or drain. And like I said, that's only because of the way they've forced it to be. They drew the picture this way, instead of recognizing that what the mass is doing, you could think of the mass as a dimple in space. So instead of instead of drawing the mass like a well, you could have drawn mass as a peak, and then understood that the peak is going to create shadows, so to speak. And that those shadows could be the thing getting cast on something else and causing it to move towards something else. So they could have metaphored it into something more comparable to everything else in physics. All the other forces do this radiating out thing. And technically gravity is radiating out, but it's radiating out as an absence of force, in the sense that something has absorbed it. So the simple model is the Lesage style model of just understanding what happens when you shadow something, a straight line force. A straight line force is going to have spots, if this object can move in any one of these forward directions. I don't even know how to do that forward thing. So the two objects have to be thought of as facing each other, and they have faces. And what's going to get absorbed by, say, this bigger object, it absorbs some of this energy. That means that energy going on that line can't hit here, and so then this thing ends up absorbing force because of the imbalance in this direction, and it moves. And then the next thing, this thing moves because of that one moving. And then because this one absorbed force, now the force shadows, so there's no force hitting here because this one absorbed it to move. Then this one doesn't get hit and it moves. And so this is induction. So that's why Einstein's formula is so convoluted and complex. Not because he's doing bent space is complex, not because turning the inverse square law into a stupid little well is complex. That's the easy part. The complex part is that when two bodies are in this gravity interaction, every millisecond, there's a change, because everything subtly changes. This thing has to absorb the energy before this one can miss it. And the trick is when it's absorbing it, it's moving in any one of these directions, any direction that has a component this way. So it moves this way and it moves that way. So obviously you're not going to see that in the so when the sun or the earth's moving, it's not really moving in a straight line. It's moving in a very convoluted line. But if you drew a line through that axis, you'd have just as much points. You'd have just as much volume of movement on either one of these two sides. So in the end, these two cancel out. The velocity's in the wrong direction, so the earth moves this way, it moves this way, it moves all herky-jerky as it moves towards the sun, and all the left and right motions, or up and down, however we want to think about it, all those motions just cancel out, and what you're left with is the end result, which is a straight line. But that's the end result. That's the net product. That's not the actual thing that's happening, and that's the inverse square law. So the inverse square law is just built out of the fact that when the earth blocks or absorbs motion, it's absorbing motion in any vector that has a component towards the sun. And that means the gravity the earth is creating is being created in all these other directions also. So it's creating gravity. All these directions have gravity. So this whole arc is gravitationally been diminished in terms of how much light, you could say, the earth is radiating. The earth isn't radiating. The radiation that was going into the earth doesn't get through the earth because the earth moved, and that lack of radiation is what we call great gravity. And it's a really valid explanation. It's 350 years old or something. I mean, in this basic form. I don't know if Lesage actually did understand this inverse square component, but it doesn't really matter, but that's the game. The idea of the absorption is technically what he was talking about, and everybody turned it into some sort of banging thing, so instead of thinking of it in terms of you're just really absorbing the energy of things, you're not, it doesn't have to be thought of as actual collisions in a technical sense. It just has to be thought of as two things that even just rubbed up against each other, and one thing was shared its velocity with the other thing. So if I had a pen moving in front of the camera, say 10 miles an hour, another one was going 20 miles an hour, you could think that now the two stick together for a moment. This 20-mile-an-hour one is going to share its velocity with this one, and it has to do it over its whole mass, and so it'll end up being the sum of the two masses plus the sum of the two velocities will be the new velocity that they'll achieve, and that they could separate, and that'll be the end of that. So there was a moment of time where this had a greater velocity. It shared velocity, and so this one leaves with less velocity, this one leaves more than what they started with when they met each other. So it doesn't even have to be collisions. But again, the point is they turned it into something like that's impossible, because somehow things are going to break into pieces and there's going to be a leftover energy. And this is in a world that was already starting to get some of this idea that things are corpuscles and they don't necessarily break into pieces. And they couldn't even do that much, you know, to have a rational theory. And it's just really, it's really annoying. So this theory, you know, that this is made out of there's an actual force, this gives you energy. This gives you a reason why the sun and the earth move towards each other. There's a force explaining the movement, and it's not just some sort of, well, it falls down a hole that doesn't really exist. Because this stupid well example, this stupid fabric of space crap, doesn't work in the real universe. I mean, it works as a two-dimensional model. It doesn't work as a three-dimensional model. It can't be put into the real universe in any way, thought of as a real thing, an actual bent something. It doesn't work. It's just a perpetual convergence. It's just a drain, a perpetual drain of some sort of fluid, of bent space, of space. So space is now the ether, and somehow matter makes it drain. It sucks the ether in, and the ether doesn't go anywhere. There's no explanation for where that ether went that you sucked in, besides making up crap about how there's new ether being created between everything all the time, spreading everything apart because space is expanding. I mean, that's another one of the just kind of nutty explanations. Two things are seen or appear to be moving apart from each other, and they claim it's because more space is being created, not because the two things start on a path that are different than each other and they end up at further distance from each other because they're moving in two directions that are in opposite planes. I mean, you know, so instead of, you know, a rational explanation, people want this you know, made up stuff. I mean, and it's just so poorly constructed. I mean, they make it into, you know, like I said, Einstein's math is complicated because its induction is complicated because it happens every single millisecond. The environment changes. Some other planet affects the Earth a little bit. They have to calculate that, and then you have to calculate the moon going around the Earth, and you have to, you know, there's lots of elements to calculate and to account for when you're going to decide how much absorption the two bodies are going to do in terms of moving towards each other. So that's why the math is complicated. But this isn't why it's complicated. The inverse square part is just this. It's just this idea of radiation. It's just a light bulb. There's nothing complex about the fundamental mechanism, and you know, all this hoopla. And so there is no bent space in the math. There's just this principle of the equal radiation in the 360 spherical radiation. That's all it is. It's just spherical radiation in reverse, which is the same thing as an external pressure coming in. A light bulb in reverse is just the same thing as if you thought of darkness as being actual photons, you know, moving towards the light bulb or something. It's the same principle. Yeah. So then I'm sitting here arguing this stuff, and so first I give you a really good model of gravity, and I explain to you too that, well, look, you know, you can worry about this whole inertia thing and velocity and how does matter move, and again, physics hasn't given you explanations. They don't tell you why things continue to move, you know, material things. And so yeah, I've given you a reasonable blueprint of, you know, many possibilities for how motion could be understood to be permanent. But even this, you talk about their math and their sophistication, they don't account for the fact that electrons don't appear to be obeying those material laws. They don't have something, they can't hold, I can't make a true electron gun. I mean, let's understand, electron guns only work because you create a negative potential, a voltage potential between two places, and you shoot the electron across the voltage. But as soon as the voltage is gone, the electron stops going. It doesn't go anywhere. It just says, fuck you, I'm looking for home now. So there's no gun. It can't shoot electrons. That's why there's no electron gun or proton gun even. So I don't even think they can shoot protons. That they can hold velocity. That you could push one and just let it go, and it just keeps going forever in space. Like you could just throw some protons into space, and they would just mind their own business and keep flying straight. So the real key point is the neutron. And there's some recognition by some physicists anyway that the neutron is really just a proton and an electron. In connection to each other. Likely the electron is actually doing the orbiting thing. So the atoms aren't doing orbits in my opinion, but this electron on the proton probably is. And as that orbit gets stretched, into any kind of direction, that directionality is going to be whatever you call that, not a round orbit. So as the orbit gets unrounded, it actually creates the opportunity for a precession, and that what the neutron can do is the neutron's electron can orbit, and the proton will have to keep moving with the electron's precession. So once the neutron gets out of balance or stretched, it'll just move in a direction of that precession, of that imbalance. So if you were thinking about Mercury having a precession, an unevenness in its orbit, where it changes over time, that just means it actually has a motion vector, but it all adds up because over time it ends up to any motion in one direction just gets canceled by the motion in the opposite direction. So this precession would just end up being circular because it's orbiting the sun. But if you set the Mercury free, or just by itself with the sun, the odds are that the thing would move in the direction, the sun and the Mercury would end up moving in the direction of the precession. There'd be a torque in that direction. And so there's an explanation for why matter moves. It's because the protons are stretched, and they're stretched in the direction of force that comes into an atom. So space shuttle engines fire, the space shuttle gets injected with a bunch of force, and through that injection the protons are aligned with their unround orbits in all the same direction, and the space shuttle moves. Because as what the neutrons do, so that was a neutron, they're tied directly to the protons. One of the strongest forces in in nuclear physics, talked about anyway, is because the neutrons are the ones that allow for the protons to be much closer to each other. So that's the function of a neutron, is to absorb this reflecting force and to allow protons to end up closer to each other, because an electron keeps creating, as this electron orbits. So let's just imagine there's well, I did the protons in black, so I should have done the N in black, and I probably should have done that orbit in red. So not perfect graphics, sorry about that, but you'll have to do. So the electron's orbiting the neutron, and what it's doing is every time it goes around, any force that starts to, any repulsion force that builds up between the proton that's inside the neutron, so the inside of the neutron is a proton. So every time the electron orbits, it releases any energy that starts to build up between, repulsive energy that builds up between these protons. So with each orbit, it releases perpendicularly from its motion the force that would be absorbed by these protons from the field and would end up between them as repulsion. So it just keeps keeping them all together, keeps them tight, tighter than they'd be in the free world. So if there were these three protons were independent of each other, just separate protons, and there was no neutron with an electron orbiting, then these three protons would have to be much further apart because of their strong repulsion. Now this is a perfectly viable explanation for how atoms work. Okay, I mean, I haven't given you every single detail, but I mean, I have talked about the details of how this particular thing happens in the force transmissions. But you can sort of visualize it. This makes sort of sense. And I've gone into this whole explanation how the only thing that's the players here are these forces, and that so electricity we can get to from here. I mean, just want to see if there's anything else I wanted to say about this neutron thing. So the point is, if the neutrons have a bias in their direction, so they can absorb a momentum and keep it. So if I throw a neutron into space, it'll keep going, where the proton and the electron won't. And the same thing is with gravity. Gravity's not going to affect electrons and protons as much because they can only be accelerated for one moment and that's it. But you accelerate a neutron with gravity, the neutron keeps going. So this is the piece that gains the momentum. This is the piece that holds the velocity. So this is the velocity holder, is the neutron. And as the neutron moves, these proton forces are always bound to each other. So as this neutron moves, it's going to drag these other players with it, and the proton's going to drag its electrons. So everybody's tied to each other with this magnetic tension, and all of these magnetic forces, that is the forces, repulsion and attraction forces, the repulsive force you can understand. Two things, the force is trapped between them and it's reflecting, it just keeps reflecting. The point is that the other force, the other polarization of the force, means that force can leak out. So if there's red force trapped, it leaks out. If there's black force, it stays. I've sort of I've gone into that explanation. But the point is that you can increase and decrease the pressure that's holding things together. So this is the tension. So the important thing is just to understand what tension is. But this also explains what a photon is. So, again, I'm giving you an explanation that not only explains why these nuclear forces hold atoms together, I'm explaining where photons come from, where it never is explained. And this also leads to magnetism, and electricity. So it's a perfectly viable unification theory. It's all made out of a real force, and you don't have to believe in a multiverse or Copenhagen's or spooky action or any of that crap. The only thing you have to say is, oh, the cosmic background radiation is a lot thicker and denser than we realize, because we don't have an instrument that can measure gravity except watching things move in it. That's how you know how much force there is in the universe. Just watch two things move into each other, and I'll tell you how much force there is in the universe. That's the real pressure of the cosmic background radiation, is the fact that how it affects these neutrons and moves them. And their motion shows you, relative to protons and electrons, because that's what charge is made out of, is that pressure. And like again, just the fact that you just polarize the pressure. So all I'm asking you to believe is to unify all of physics, explain magnetism. I don't know if I want to explain magnetism in this video because I've already done it in other videos. But it unifies all of this. So you got the nuclear forces, you got gravity, you got magnetism, and you got a mechanical explanation. And all you need to believe is that in the universe there's a bunch of little photons that are not at a frequency, so you can't see them. So just imagine frequency is gone and there's still a photon. So you can't measure it because it doesn't have a frequency, okay? And there are two types, there are two polarizations. There's, red and black, or there's round and square. It doesn't matter how you understand the difference. I could just make a bunch of circles and squares. There are two different types, so I could just make them as polarizations. I could mean they're shaped this way or they're shaped this way in terms of the geometry through which they're flying through the universe. It doesn't matter, it's polarization. So there's two types of these little bits, And all the red ones are identical, all the black ones are identical, and the black ones interact with the electron, and the red ones interact with the proton in terms of reflecting. So the black reflects off the protons, the red ones reflect off the, I said that wrong, the black ones reflect off the electrons, the red ones reflect off the protons, and the red ones perpendicularly are released by the electron, and the black ones are perpendicularly released by the protons. So a simple explanation explains all these forces. All you got to do is believe this exists, which isn't a big stretch when you think of all the radiation that's hitting us all the time. You're getting hit by radio waves, you're getting hit by microwaves, you're getting hit by cosmic radiation, you're getting hit by the cosmic background radiation. And all you have to do is say, oh yeah, well, what if gravity was just like that radiation, except for one thing? The little bits aren't coming at a perfect frequency, so they can't be detected through common functions like moving an electron, And I've gone through the whole tipping point explanation that explains Einstein's photoelectric effect. That the only thing that's really happening is you're hitting an electron twice, and it doesn't have time to rebound. So if you push something down, so just think of it as, here's an electron, here's another electron in the matter. So here's the matter surface, here's kind of a loose electron. Say a photon hits the loose electron, pushes it closer to this other electron, which creates more pressure. Well, this electron's going to bounce right back, but if it gets hit again before it has time to rebound, then it gets pushed back even deeper. And that deep pressure, that harder pressure, means it's going to bounce far enough where it won't be able to be pulled back. The proton pressure that this thing is being attracted to won't be strong enough to recapture it once you release it at a high enough velocity. So, perfectly good explanation for the photoelectric effect, all explained. And I'm getting all this grief from people, and this is it. This is all you have to believe, is that, yeah, the universe has more of these invisible forces than we see with our eyes exist. And you already know they exist. You already know you're getting hit by microwaves. You already know you're getting hit by all kinds of radiation, infrared radiation, all around you all the time. You're radiating some of it. All kinds of this little particle radiation. Same exact stuff, just not at a frequency. And then for magnets, it's just the magnet polarizes that same radiation. Might as well do it real quick. So, yeah, so you have the radiation is all different, next radiation comes in from all directions all the time, and when there's a balance of it, nothing happens. And it's when you change the balance of it, when there's more of something coming from one side than the other, then matter gets moved. It absorbs the difference. It's always absorbing some energy. So something's sitting here, when the energy's hitting it, it's always absorbing some of the energy. Some of the energy goes in, gives it a little, stays in here, so to speak, for a moment, and then leaves. And so the thing moves in this direction a little bit. But the same things happen from the other side. So it moves back this way a little bit. And that gives you your Brownian motion. Everything's being jostled by the field energy, and that jostling ends up not changing the location as long as there's no real imbalance in the field. If it's just the imbalance of randomness, that'll always end up to a neutral. But if I make a magnet, if I create a magnet, a filter, now the force that goes in is going to be mixed, and the force that comes out isn't going to be mixed. So you're going to have all this mixed stuff coming in, black and red. Okay, so it's all black and red going in, and when it comes out, it's going to be all red coming out of here, all black coming out. Oops, all black coming out of this other side. So you can understand that imbalance is going to mean something to an electron or a proton, because now its environment is going to be heavily hit by reflective force from one side, and is only getting half as much of that reflective force from the other side. So it's going to be getting a lot more energy going this way, because the black energy is the leaking out 50% energy, and so it's much weaker. So it's getting more of the strong reflection, the 180-degree change in direction, and it's getting less of the 90-degree, so the weaker one. And you have exactly the opposite here. You have a complete balance coming from the field of 180s and 90s. So you can understand that that difference is going to mean this thing will have to be moved by the magnet. It's all there. You know, all of it. So physics is unified. I mean, yes, okay, it seems improbable that, you know, some annoying jerk like me would fall on, you know, a simple answer to all of these questions that were left unanswered for thousands of years. Nobody could sit there and do this simple idea of just thinking about a light bulb and thinking about the inverse square law and thinking about, well, gravity is just working like it's in a sea of energy. And you put things in a sea of energy, they're going to block each other, and by creating shadows, essentially a force, they're going to absorb the force as they move, and as they absorb it, they're going to hit into each other. Not that complicated. And again, 300 years ago, another guy did the same thing here. Like, he didn't have enough information to tie it to magnetism, to tie it to the nuclear forces and all the rest of it. But he gave them the seed of the idea, and what did they do? They spat on it. They poured acid on it. They found every excuse to pretend it didn't look like a great answer. And then they iconify this Feynman guy because he spends 15 seconds of gibberish and rhetoric to dismiss it by comparing it to raindrops and saying it can't be true because you hit more raindrops in your face than you do from behind, and, you know, just stupid arguments that have to do with inertia, again, with velocity, something they don't even understand as a function. So how can they know that there's no answer to that velocity problem? Because they didn't think about it. They didn't consider it. They didn't want it to be the answer for some reason. And they did everything they could to avoid it. And now that I've made it unify all of physics, I've showed you how the same force makes magnetism, the same force holds the atoms together, the same force creates every effect we know of, how it fits, and it fits everything, and it fits everything really well. And it could, certainly a few mathematicians can tighten this up even better. You know, certainly some more people doing some more work. One man did this. They've been talking about their Copenhagen crap and their fucking many worlds crap and their, you know, bent this and bullshit crap for 100 frickin' years. Every single one of them studying it. You know, and they still can't make it make sense. They still can't explain it. In 2017, their explanations are getting loopier and loopier. And it's this simple. And I get grief from you assholes. Just amazing. Sorry, I'm finding it just demonstrates the human race is just too fucking stupid, because this is just logical. You can't escape that this looks too fucking good. It's so damn simple, you know, that it has to be the right answer, but you can't have a wrong answer that could be this simple. There's no way to invent a wrong answer this simple. There's not one single fairy wing in this thing. There's nothing even close to a Sasquatch. There's not even a guy with a beard in this. There's nothing looking UFO. And so how can you come up with something this simple, this almost as simple as hammer and nail, almost as simple as truly a checkerboard, red and black squares and red and black checkers. That simple, and it works. It couldn't possibly work if it wasn't right and be that simple. So anyway, it's just really irritating because I'm going to be dead, and you know, I'm not going to be able to enjoy the fact that, hey, I actually did something. That's pretty cool. I'm not going to get any of that. I'm just going to get all this fucking grief, and it's just really irritating. And then, you know, 100 years from now, somebody's going, oh yeah, well, I guess Gary was right. Yeah, well, that's going to do me a lot of good when I'm fucking dead and got treated like shit. Ugh, it's disgusting. Really is. So anyway, that's probably enough. I mean, I could hit more subjects. But it's all there. I mean, why are you people giving me so much grief? The tiny details I haven't provided you when I've given you so fucking much. And you know, it's there. It's there. And it's so simple. So why don't you show me where this violates Maxwell's equations in some way? Show me one place where this can't work. Show me. You bastards. That's enough. So anyway, I do believe. So just for those who care about technology issues or something maybe. So yeah, there's been a few videos where I had a problem with the audio because I'm using a separate mic to hear what the speakers were hearing, because the program wasn't picking up the internal speaker audio. And so I think I fixed that, so I don't have to use the extra mic, which means I won't probably be getting the feedback problem. But yeah, I don't know why halfway through a video all of a sudden it would start picking up the internal thing. And so, but I think I fixed it, so I don't think that'll happen anymore. Now there might be some sync issues because it's still hard to get, this computer just doesn't run fast enough, so I have to change the speed of which the audio is running to make it fit the video. So it probably, when I play a video, the sync on the person talking in the video is probably going to be off now. But that might be a good enough trade-off for not having the echo. So anyway, but I'm using Linux Mint, and it worked with Manjaro, but Manjaro just doesn't. This got all kinds of issues with its swap file. It's just, like I said, I wanted it to work. I spent days actually trying to make it work, and it just always kept failing. And you couldn't make copies of it to play on. You know, it wouldn't transfer from one computer to another computer, which is really irritating. Where Mint does it, you know, no problem. You know, I just plug a hard drive in this computer or that same one, works fine. So it even does all the driver thing without screwing up. And so anyway, but that's what the reason why the videos have been a little poor is that I'm using a new operating system and program I've never used, and you know, there's a learning curve. So quit being assholes about it. Alright. Not that most people have been, it's just there's always some asshole who's always an asshole, and so he just makes you feel like there's more assholes out there. And that's always a problem. You know, you don't get a very representative feeling for the internet, you know, based on the assholes, who comment. But anyway, until the next time and such, enough. I just don't know how you people can't concede this looks awful good. I mean, to just be so black and white even. If you want to say, well, you know, it's difficult, it's a hard decision to make, it's like I'm getting married to something, I don't really want to marry, you know, somebody with herpes, and your idea might have herpes, and so I really don't, sure, it's okay. You want to say, I just really don't want to let go of multiverses, and Einstein was smart, and you really can't get around that, and so, you know, I don't want to go against Einstein, I want to go against all, you know, Brian Greene is a, you know, pompous prick and all that kind of stuff, but he went to college and shit, so he should know something, even though he does talk a lot of wacky crap. I mean, you know, he's popular. You know, I can hear you making excuses, fine, but this idea that you know I'm wrong somehow, that's just so obnoxious. How the fuck do you know that? You haven't demonstrated it. You don't demonstrate a single problem this theory has in any of these, you know, and certainly in no general terms, and certainly no specific terms as specific as the details you require from conventional physics. You don't ask them to tell you why this happens. You don't ask them where did electrons come from. You don't ask them. You don't even ask them where photons come from. They don't give you an explanation of what creates a photon. They don't tell you what creates it. I do. They don't tell you shit, and I'm answering questions they never even answered. Why do magnets move? Why does matter move? I'm answering the question. Why does it keep moving? I'm answering the question. So you don't even ask them for details. They haven't provided them, and you don't even force them to. You don't even badger them to. And yet you badger me for much more detail than you expect from them. and then you try to tell me you're being fair and you're giving me an honest appraisal is this is all rubbish somehow, and you somehow know it, even though this has more details, and then you'll try to claim it's somehow undetailed or it's too complicated, it has too many rules, it has two polarizations, two kinds of force, and basically two kinds of matter element. Electrons and protons. Neutrons are a combination. So there's two matter elements and two force elements. That's too many rules. That's too complicated. That's too bizarre. I mean, come on. You just deserve a fuck you. How could you be so fucking goddamn insanely unfair to say this is rubbish? You fucking cunts. You fucking ignorant motherfuckers. God, I hate your guts. I mean, really, you're just such despicable creatures. Ugh. Anyway, enough. That's enough now. Yeah.